Hello friends, welcome to my channel. Today this video is about what are React lifecycle methods. You can think of React lifecycle methods are the series of events that happen from the birth of a React component to its death. Every component in React goes through a life cycle of events. I like to think of them as going through a cycle of birth, growth, and death. First is mounting, where the birth of your component. Second is update, there growth of your component. Third is unmount, this is the death of your component. Now that we understand the series of life cycle events, let's see more about how they work in this video. The common React lifecycle methods are, I written it here, see in the screen. The first is render method, second component did mount, third is component did update, and fourth is component will unmount. These are the most commonly method used in React. The first one is render. The render method is the most used lifecycle method. You will see it in all React classes. This is because render method is the only required method within a class component in React. As the name suggests, it handles the rendering of your component to the UI. It happens during the mounting and updating of your component. On screen, there is an example of a sample render method in React. As you can see in the example on the screen, the render method returns JSX that is displayed in the UI. A render method can also return a null if there is nothing to render for that component. A render method has to be pure with no side effect. Here is very important point coming to be noted. React requires that your render method is pure. So what is the pure function? So pure function are those that do not have any side effects and will always return the same output when the same input are passed. This means that you cannot set state with a render method. You can modify the component state within the render method. If you do need to modify state, that would have to happen in the other lifecycle methods, therefore keeping render method pure. Moreover, keeping your render method simple and clean without state updates makes your app sustainable. Now the next method is component did mount. Now your component has been mounted and ready. Now the next React lifecycle method component did mount comes in picture. Component did mount method is called as soon as the component is mounted and ready. This is a good place to initiate API calls. If you need to load data from a remote endpoint in your project. Not like the render method, component did mount allows the use of setState method. Calling the setState method here will update state and cause another rendering, but it will happen before the browser updates the UI means user interface. This is to ensure that the user or viewer will not see any UI updates with the double rendering. We can modify the component state within the component did mount method, but use it with risk avoidance. The point to be noted here is the best practice is to ensure that your states are assigned in the constructor method, as I discussed in my last video. The reason React allows the setState method within this lifecycle method is for special cases like models, tooltips, and similar concepts. When you would need to measure a DOM node before rendering something that's depend on its position. Rendering means publish something on your UI. In addition, DOM is document object model. And I hope if things so right, then we will discuss about it in more details in very next video. So here is the method is component did mount. Now the third method is component did update. This lifecycle method invoked as soon as the updating happens. The most common use case for the component did update method is updating the DOM in response to prop or state changes. You can call setState method in this lifecycle, but keep in mind that we need to wrap it in a condition to check for state or prop changes from previous state. Incorrect usage of setState method can lead to an infinite loop, and you can modify the component state within the component did update method, but use it with attention. Take a look at the example on the screen that indicates a typical usage example of this life cycle method. Did you notice in this example code that we are comparing the current props to the previous props? This is to check if there has been a change in props from what it currently is. In this case, there will not be a need to make a API call if the props did not change. In addition, API stands for Application Programming Interface. An API is a software intermediary that allows two applications to talk to each other. In other words, an API is a messenger that delivers your request to the provider that you are requesting it from and then delivers the response back to you. So this is the third method of component did update. Now the next method is component will unmount. As the name suggests, this lifecycle method is just before the component is unmounted and destroyed. If there were any cleanup action that you would need to do, this would be the right spot. You cannot modify the component state in component will unmount lifecycle. This component will never be re-rendered, and because of that we cannot call setState method during this lifecycle method. Common cleanup activities performed in this method include clearing timers, cancelling API calls, or clearing any cache and storage, as you can see in the code. Now the uncommon React lifecycle methods. We now have a good idea of all the commonly used React lifecycle methods. Besides that, there are other lifecycle methods that React.js offers which are infrequently used or not used at all. So the should component update. This lifecycle method can be handy sometimes when you do not want React to render your state or props changes. Anytime setState method is called, the component re-renders by default. The should_component_update method is used to let React know if a component is not affected by a state and prop changes. Once again, I am telling you, the should_component_update method is used to let React know if a component is not affected by the state and prop changes. Keep in mind that this lifecycle method should be sparingly used, and it exists only for certain performance optimization. You can't update component state in should component update method lifecycle. Here is point to be noticed. Most importantly, do not always rely on it to prevent rendering of your component, since it can lead to several bugs. As shown in the example in screen, this lifecycle should always return a boolean value to the question: should I re-render my component? The answer should be in a boolean value, means true or false. Now now comes static get derived state from props method. This is one of the newer lifecycle method introduced very recently by the ReactJS team. This will be a safer alternative to the previous lifecycle method, like component will receive props. It is called just before calling the render method. This is a static function that does not have access to this get derived state from props method. Returns an object to update state in response to prop changes. It can return a null if there is no change to state. This method also exists only for rare use cases where the state depends on changes in props in a component. This lifecycle method is fired on every render method. An example use case where this method come in handy would be the component that compares its previous and next children to decide which one to animate in and out. And the other is get snapshot before update method. Resizing the window during an async rendering is a good use case of when the get snapshot before update can be utilized. This is another new lifecycle method introduced in React. This will be a safer alternative to previous to the previous lifecycle method component will update method. Get snapshot method, it is called right before the DOM is updated. The value that is returned from this method is passed on to component did update method. Keep in mind that this method should also be used rarely or not used at all. So these all are the methods. There is a React component lifecycle diagram. I will share the link in the description box. You can check it with the official React documentation. And in the recap of this video, React component lifecycle has three categories. First is mounting, updating, and unmounting. In the starting of this video, I discuss about it. And the render method is the most used lifecycle method. It is a pure function and you cannot set state in render. The componentDidMount method happens as soon as your component is mounted. You can set state here but with caution. The componentDidUpdate method happens as soon as the updating happens. The component will unmount method happens just before the component unmount and is destroyed. The should component update method can be used rarely. The two new lifecycle methods are getDerived from props and snapshot before update. They need to be used only occasionally. Not many examples are out there for these two methods and they are still being discussed and we have more reference in the future. Moreover, if you like this educational video, don't forget to like and subscribe and more share with your friends.